Victor Hugo is widely regarded as one of the greatest literary figures in French history, a writer whose influence extends far beyond the realm of literature. As a poet, novelist, playwright, and political thinker, Hugo left an indelible mark on the cultural and intellectual landscape of France and beyond. His works not only shaped the Romantic movement, but also reflected and influenced the political and social transformations of his time. To understand the impact of Victor Hugo, one must examine his literary achievements, his role as a social critic, and his lasting legacy as a champion of human rights and justice. Born in 1802, Hugo lived through one of the most tumultuous periods in French history. His life spanned the fall of Napoleon, the Bourbon Restoration, the July Monarchy, the revolutions of 1848, the rise and fall of the Second Empire, and the establishment of the Third Republic. This ever-changing political climate played a crucial role in shaping his thoughts and works. Unlike many writers who confined themselves to the world of fiction, Hugo actively engaged in the social and political struggles of his time, using his writing as a powerful tool for change. His novels, plays, and poems are not merely artistic expressions, but also bold statements on justice, freedom, and the resilience of the human spirit. Victor Hugo was a key figure in the Romantic movement, a literary and artistic revolution that sought to break away from the rigid rules of classicism. Romanticism emphasized emotion, individualism, and the sublime aspects of nature and humanity. Hugo's early works, such as Odes et Ballades, 1826, and Hernani, 1830, played a crucial role in establishing Romanticism as the dominant literary style in France. His defiance of traditional poetic and dramatic structures not only earned him praise, but also provoked controversy, particularly among conservative literary circles. However, it was precisely this defiance that solidified his reputation as a literary innovator. Perhaps the most defining characteristic of Hugo's literary career was his ability to intertwine grand historical narratives with deeply personal and humanistic themes. His novels, particularly Notre Dame de Paris, 1831, and Les Miserables, 1862, are masterpieces that transcend their historical settings. Notre Dame de Paris brought renewed attention to Gothic architecture, leading to the restoration of the iconic cathedral. Les Miserables, on the other hand, is not merely a novel about a fugitive and his pursuer. It is a sweeping social critique that exposes the injustices of 19th-century France. The book's themes of redemption, sacrifice, and the struggle against oppression have made it a timeless work that continues to resonate with readers worldwide. Beyond literature, Hugo's impact on French society was profound. His political engagement was as significant as his literary contributions. Initially a supporter of the monarchy, he later embraced republicanism and became a fierce critic of tyranny and injustice. His opposition to Napoleon III's authoritarian rule led to his exile from France, but rather than silencing him, exile only amplified his voice. From his residence in Guernsey, he produced some of his most powerful political writings, including Napoleon le Petit and Les Châtiments, works that exposed the corruption and oppression of the Second Empire. His steadfast commitment to democratic ideals made him not just a writer, but a symbol of resistance and moral integrity. Hugo's influence extended beyond politics into humanitarian causes. He was a vocal advocate for the abolition of the death penalty, a theme that appears repeatedly in his works, such as Le Dernier Jour d'un Condamné, 1829. He also spoke out against poverty, child labor, and social inequality, calling for a more just and compassionate society. His belief in the power of literature to inspire change is evident in the way his works continue to be used as a reference point in discussions about justice and human rights. His writings are not relics of the past, but living documents that still have the power to provoke thought and inspire action. The recognition Hugo received during his lifetime was immense, but his influence only grew after his death. In 1885, his funeral was a national event, attended by millions who mourned not just the loss of a writer, but of a national hero. His remains were placed in the Pantheon, alongside other great figures of French history. This was a fitting tribute to a man whose words had shaped the consciousness of a nation. His legacy endures not only in literature, but also in the principles of democracy and social justice that he so passionately defended. Even in the modern era, Hugo's works continue to be relevant. Les Miserables has been adapted into countless plays, films, and musicals, ensuring that its message reaches new generations. The novel's themes of compassion, redemption, and the fight against oppression remain as urgent today as they were in the 19th century. Meanwhile, Notre Dame de Paris stands as both a literary masterpiece and a testament to the importance of cultural preservation. In times of crisis, such as the devastating fire that struck the Notre Dame Cathedral in 2019, Hugo's words remind people of the deep historical and cultural significance of such monuments. Victor Hugo's status as a literary giant is undisputed, but what sets him apart from other great writers is his unwavering commitment to justice and humanity. His life and works exemplify the idea that literature is not merely an artistic pursuit but a force for social change. He believed that writers had a responsibility to challenge oppression, to give a voice to the voiceless, and to inspire people to build a better world. This philosophy is what makes his legacy enduring and his influence immeasurable. In sum, Victor Hugo was not just a novelist, a poet, or a playwright. He was a visionary. His ability to merge literature with social activism created works that continue to inspire and educate. His contributions to Romanticism, his fearless political engagement, and his advocacy for human rights make him one of the most important figures in world literature. His words, filled with passion and conviction, remind us of the transformative power of storytelling and the enduring relevance of fighting for justice. Victor Hugo's remarkable journey as a literary giant and social advocate was shaped by the circumstances of his early life. Born on February 26, 1802, in Besançon, France, he was the youngest of three sons in a family marked by political and ideological contrasts. His father, Joseph Leopold Sigisbert Hugo, was a high-ranking officer in Napoleon Bonaparte's army, while his mother, Sophie Trebuchet, was a devout royalist with strong Catholic beliefs. This ideological divide within his family would have a lasting impact on Hugo's personal and intellectual development, influencing both his early writings and his later political evolution. Leopold Hugo's military career meant that the family was often uprooted, leading to an unstable childhood for young Victor. His father's service took them across France, Italy, and Spain, exposing Hugo to different cultures and environments at an early age. This exposure would later enrich his writing, as he drew inspiration from the diverse landscapes, histories, and traditions he encountered. However, these frequent moves also created a sense of displacement and instability, which may have contributed to the themes of exile and wandering that appear throughout his works. Despite his father's prominence, Hugo's early life was not without hardship. His parents' marriage was deeply troubled, largely due to political differences and Leopold's long military absences. Eventually, Sophie Trebuchet chose to separate from her husband and settled in Paris with her children. It was in Paris that Victor received his early education under the guidance of his mother, who exerted a profound influence on his upbringing. Sophie, a strict and religious woman, instilled in him a deep appreciation for literature, particularly the works of classical and pre-revolutionary French writers. Under his mother's tutelage, Hugo developed a passion for language and storytelling from an early age. He displayed an exceptional talent for poetry and was encouraged to pursue a literary career. He and his brothers were enrolled in the prestigious Lycée Louis Le Grand in Paris, where he excelled in literature and demonstrated an extraordinary ability to compose verse. However, his academic success was overshadowed by personal loss when his mother passed away in 1821. Her death deeply affected him, and though he initially aligned with her conservative political views, it was after this loss that his ideological stance began to shift. At the age of 17, Hugo set out to establish himself as a writer. His early works were deeply influenced by his mother's royalist sympathies, and his first poems and essays reflected a conservative worldview. However, as he matured and gained exposure to the literary and political movements of his time, his perspective evolved. He became increasingly drawn to Romanticism, a literary movement that emphasized emotion, individualism, and a break from classical traditions. This transformation marked the beginning of his emergence as a leading voice in French literature. Hugo's relationship with his father also played a crucial role in his development. After his mother's death, he reconnected with Leopold, who introduced him to new ideas and perspectives. His father's experiences as a soldier in Napoleon's campaigns provided Hugo with a broader understanding of history, leadership, and political change. This newfound exposure to his father's ideals contributed to the gradual shift in his political beliefs, steering him away from rigid monarchist views toward a more nuanced Republican stance. Another defining element of Hugo's early years was his love life. In 1819, at the age of 17, he fell in love with Adele Fouquer, a childhood friend. However, their relationship faced strong opposition from Adele's family, who did not believe that Hugo, still an aspiring writer without financial stability, could provide for their daughter. This opposition only strengthened Hugo's determination to succeed. He worked tirelessly to establish himself in the literary world, and by 1822, at the age of 20, he published his first collection of poetry, Odes et Poésies diverses. The success of this work earned him a pension from King Louis XVIII and provided him with the means to marry Adele later that year. His marriage to Adele marked a new chapter in his life, one filled with both literary triumphs and personal challenges. Their relationship, though passionate in its early years, became strained over time due to Hugo's growing fame, political involvement, and eventual extramarital affairs. Nevertheless, his love for Adele remained an important element in his personal narrative, influencing many of the themes of love and betrayal that appear in his works. By the time he entered his 20s, Hugo had already positioned himself as a promising literary figure. His early years had been shaped by the contrasting influences of his parents, the turbulence of political change, and the loss of his mother. These formative experiences laid the foundation for his later writings, which would explore themes of love, justice, exile, and the human condition. Ultimately, Hugo's early life was a microcosm of the broader struggles that would define 19th century France. The ideological conflicts within his own family mirrored the divisions in the country at large, and his journey from a royalist upbringing to a republican ideology reflected the shifting tides of French history. The experiences of his youth, his exposure to military life, his literary education, his early love, and his personal hardships were not just stepping stones in his own development. They became the raw material for the masterpieces he would later create. Victor Hugo's education played a fundamental role in shaping him into the literary giant he would become. From an early age, he exhibited an exceptional aptitude for language and writing, demonstrating a talent that far surpassed his peers. His formal education, combined with the influence of his family and the cultural movements of his time, provided him with the intellectual foundation necessary to establish himself as one of the most important writers of the 19th century. It was during these formative years that he developed the stylistic and thematic elements that would characterize his later works. Hugo's early education took place under the strict guidance of his mother, Sophie Trebuchet, who ensured that he and his brothers received a rigorous classical education. She enrolled him in private tutoring sessions before he was admitted to the prestigious Lycée Louis-le-Grand in Paris, one of the most renowned schools in France. The Lycée had a strong tradition of producing some of the country's finest intellectuals, and it was here that Hugo was exposed to Latin, rhetoric, and classical literature. He studied the works of Virgil, Horace, and Cicero, which not only sharpened his linguistic skills, but also instilled in him an appreciation for the grandeur of epic storytelling. Despite his proficiency in classical studies, Hugo was not particularly drawn to the rigid structures of traditional literature. Instead, he was more fascinated by the emerging Romantic movement, which sought to break free from the constraints of classicism. Romanticism emphasized emotion, nature, and individual experience over the strict rules of form and reason. As a young student, Hugo was captivated by the works of François-René de Chateaubriand, who was considered the father of French Romanticism. Chateaubriand's writings, particularly Génie du Christianisme, left a deep impression on him and influenced his early poetic endeavors. Hugo's literary aspirations became evident when, at the age of 15, he and his brother Eugene founded a literary journal, Le Conservateur Littéraire. This publication allowed him to experiment with different styles of writing, including poetry, essays, and short stories. Even at this young age, his writings displayed a remarkable maturity, blending eloquence with social and historical themes. Le Conservateur littéraire was not widely circulated, but it was an important step in establishing his identity as a writer. It also helped him gain recognition within literary circles, attracting the attention of influential figures. By the time he turned 17, Hugo had already begun composing poetry with a level of sophistication that set him apart from other aspiring writers. His early poems were deeply influenced by classical themes, religious devotion, and royalist sentiments, reflecting the conservative views he inherited from his mother. However, as he gained more exposure to contemporary literature and political thought, his work began to evolve. He started to move away from rigid poetic structures, embracing the emotional depth and imaginative freedom that Romanticism encouraged. In 1822, at the age of 20, Hugo published his first major work, Odes et Poésies diverses, a collection of poems that earned him a royal pension from King Louis XVIII. This early recognition provided him with financial stability and enabled him to pursue his literary career more seriously. The collection was well received by critics, who praised its elegance and refinement. However, despite its success, it remained firmly rooted in classical traditions, and it would take a few more years before Hugo fully embraced the Romantic movement. His breakthrough as a Romantic writer came with the publication of Odes et Ballades in 1826. This collection marked a turning point in his literary style, as he began experimenting with more expressive language, vivid imagery, and themes that reflected personal emotions rather than rigid formalism. The work signaled Hugo's transition from a neoclassical poet to a leader of the Romantic movement. It was during this time that he became associated with other Romantic writers, including Alfred de Vigny and Alphonse de Lamartine, who encouraged him to further explore the artistic freedom that Romanticism offered. Hugo's early literary success was not limited to poetry. In 1827, he published his first major play, Cromwell, which was a bold declaration of his commitment to the Romantic aesthetic. The preface to Cromwell became one of the most influential manifestos of the Romantic movement, where Hugo famously argued against the artificial constraints of classicism and advocated for a more natural, expressive form of drama. Though the play itself was too lengthy to be staged, its preface became a revolutionary document that inspired a generation of playwrights and poets. The late 1820s marked a period of rapid growth for Hugo as he continued to refine his literary voice. His works became increasingly ambitious, addressing themes of love, power, and the struggles of the human spirit. He also began to engage more directly with political and social issues, foreshadowing the deep moral and philosophical concerns that would define his later masterpieces. His ability to blend poetic beauty with profound social commentary set him apart from his contemporaries and solidified his reputation as a formidable intellectual force. By the end of this period, Hugo had firmly established himself as a leading figure in French literature. His education had provided him with a strong classical foundation, but it was his willingness to challenge conventions and embrace new ideas that truly defined his early literary endeavors. His transition from a precocious poet to a revolutionary Romantic writer laid the groundwork for the masterpieces he would later create. With his poetic talent recognized and his dramatic ambitions gaining momentum, Hugo was poised to make an even greater impact on French literature and culture. Victor Hugo's ascent to literary fame coincided with a period of great transformation in French literature. The early 19th century witnessed a fierce battle between classicism, which had dominated French artistic traditions for centuries, and the emerging Romantic movement, which sought to break free from rigid structures in favor of emotion, imagination, and individual expression. Hugo quickly positioned himself at the forefront of this cultural revolution, becoming one of the most influential voices in the movement. His poetic, dramatic, and narrative works not only challenged existing literary conventions but also redefined the role of the writer in society. One of the defining moments in Hugo's rise to fame was the publication of Odes et Ballades in 1826. This collection of poems demonstrated his mastery of lyrical expression and his growing departure from classical themes. While his early poetry had adhered to the refined elegance of neoclassicism, Odes et Ballades showcased a more adventurous style, filled with vivid imagery, dramatic contrasts, and a deeper engagement with human emotions. This shift in his writing reflected the core tenets of Romanticism, which emphasized passion, the sublime, and a rejection of strict formalism. However, it was in the realm of theater that Hugo made his most audacious challenge to classicism. French drama had long been dominated by the strict rules of neoclassicism, as established by playwrights like Racine and Corneille. These rules dictated that plays must adhere to the three unities. Unity of time, events must occur within 24 hours. Unity of place, a single location. And unity of action, a single, coherent plot without subplots. Romantic playwrights, including Hugo, saw these constraints as stifling and sought to break free from them. Hugo's dramatic manifesto came in the form of Cromwell, 1827, a historical play that, while never performed due to its immense length, included a famous preface that became a rallying cry for Romanticism. In this preface, Hugo argued that literature should reflect the complexity and contradictions of real life, blending the beautiful with the grotesque, the noble with the common. He declared that tragedy and comedy should coexist, as they do in human experience, and that playwrights should be free to experiment with form and structure. This revolutionary vision laid the groundwork for the Romantic movement in French theater. The true test of Hugo's romantic ideals came with the premiere of Hernani in 1830. This play, a historical drama filled with passion, rebellion, and poetic intensity, directly challenged the conventions of neoclassical theater. It ignited what became known as the Bataille de Hernani, Battle of Hernani, a cultural war between traditionalists and romantics. On the night of its first performance at the Comédie Française, supporters and detractors of Romanticism clashed in the audience, with heated debates, shouting, and even physical altercations breaking out during the play. Despite the controversy, or perhaps because of it, Hernani became a sensation, solidifying Hugo's status as the leader of the Romantic movement in France. The success of Hernani marked a turning point in French literature. It demonstrated that the old literary establishment was losing its grip on the artistic world, and that a new generation of writers was ready to embrace change. Hugo's bold defiance of tradition inspired other Romantic authors, including Alexandre Dumas and Alfred de Musset, to push the boundaries of their own works. The triumph of Romanticism was not merely an aesthetic victory, but also a cultural shift, reflecting the broader revolutionary spirit that was taking hold in France during the 19th century. Following Hernani, Hugo continued to experiment with drama, publishing plays such as Marion Delorme, 1831, and Le Roi et sa Muse, 1832. The latter play, which portrayed a corrupt and decadent monarchy, was quickly banned by the government, reinforcing Hugo's reputation as a writer willing to challenge authority. His willingness to use literature as a means of social and political critique set him apart from his contemporaries and foreshadowed the more overt political engagement that would define his later career. While his plays were controversial, his narrative fiction also began to gain recognition. In 1831, Hugo published Notre Dame de Paris, commonly known in English as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, a novel that not only captivated readers with its rich storytelling, but also played a significant role in raising awareness about the importance of preserving France's architectural heritage. The novel's vivid descriptions of the cathedral and its historical setting reignited public interest in Gothic architecture, eventually leading to restoration efforts for Notre Dame. This demonstrated Hugo's ability to influence not just literature, but also national consciousness and cultural policy. The 1830s were a decade of growing fame and influence for Hugo. By the middle of the decade, he had established himself as a literary powerhouse, earning both admiration and controversy for his bold artistic choices. His works resonated with a wide audience, from intellectuals and artists to ordinary readers who found in his stories a reflection of their own struggles and dreams. He was no longer just a poet or a playwright. He was a cultural figure whose ideas and works shaped the direction of French literature and thought. Victor Hugo's rise to fame was not simply the result of artistic talent. It was a consequence of his willingness to challenge conventions, to speak to the human condition, and to engage with the political and social currents of his time. His triumph in the battle for Romanticism was not just a personal victory, but a transformation of French literature itself. He had successfully paved the way for a new era of artistic expression, one that would continue to evolve and inspire long after his lifetime. Victor Hugo's literary career was not confined to artistic expression alone. He was deeply engaged with the social and political issues of his time. As France underwent profound changes in the 19th century, shifting from monarchy to republic, experiencing revolutions, and struggling with issues of inequality, Hugo evolved from a royalist sympathizer to one of the most outspoken advocates for justice, democracy, and human rights. His political engagement not only influenced his writings, but also transformed him into a key figure in the fight for social reform. Hugo's early political views were largely shaped by his mother's staunch royalist beliefs. As a young writer, he initially supported the Bourbon monarchy, and his early poetry reflected a conservative, pro-monarchical perspective. However, as he matured and witnessed the injustices of society, his stance began to shift. His growing exposure to the struggles of the poor, the corruption of the ruling class, and the plight of political prisoners led him to reconsider his allegiances. The July Revolution of 1830, which replaced the Bourbon monarchy with the constitutional rule of Louis Philippe, marked the beginning of his political transformation. During the 1830s and 1840s, Hugo increasingly distanced himself from conservative politics and began embracing liberal and humanitarian ideas. His novel Notre Dame de Paris, 1831, already reflected a sensitivity to the injustices of society, particularly in its portrayal of marginalized characters like Quasimodo and Esmeralda. However, it was in his later works that his political convictions became more pronounced. His writing became a vehicle for advocating social justice, equality, and the rights of the oppressed. By the 1840s, Hugo had established himself as more than just a writer. He was becoming a public intellectual with a growing interest in political activism. In 1841, he was elected to the French Academy, an acknowledgement of his literary contributions, but his ambitions extended beyond literature. In 1845, King Louis Philippe appointed him to the Chamber of Peers, granting him a platform to participate in political debates. Though still hesitant to fully break away from his aristocratic roots, Hugo used his position to speak out on important social issues, including prison reform, the abolition of the death penalty, and the need for greater educational opportunities for the poor. His deepening commitment to social causes was further reflected in his literary works. Le Dernier Jour d'un Condamné, The Last Day of a Condemned Man, published in 1829, was one of his earliest critiques of the death penalty, but his most powerful denunciation of social injustice came with Les Miserables, 1862. Though still years away from being published, the novel was already taking shape in his mind during this period. Hugo's encounters with ex-convicts, his observations of extreme poverty in Paris, and his growing awareness of systemic oppression all contributed to his vision of a work that would expose the suffering of the poor and the failures of the legal system. The Revolution of 1848 was a turning point in Hugo's political evolution. The collapse of the July monarchy and the establishment of the Second Republic brought a wave of hope for social and political reform. Hugo fully embraced the Republican ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. He was elected as a deputy to the National Assembly, where he became a vocal advocate for democratic values, free speech, and the rights of the working class. His speeches in the Assembly reflected his growing belief that government should serve the people, not the aristocracy. However, Hugo's optimism about the Republic was soon shattered. In 1851, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte, staged a coup d'état and declared himself Emperor Napoleon III. This marked the end of the Second Republic and the beginning of the authoritarian Second Empire. Hugo, who had initially supported Louis Napoleon, was horrified by this betrayal of democracy. He openly condemned the coup, calling it an attack on the Republic and the principles of liberty. His opposition made him an enemy of the regime, forcing him into exile. Hugo's exile, which lasted nearly 20 years, did not silence him. It only strengthened his resolve. He relocated to Belgium and later settled in the Channel Islands, first in Jersey and then in Guernsey. From abroad, he continued his fierce criticism of Napoleon III, publishing scathing political essays such as Napoleon le Petit, 1852, and Histoire d'un crime, 1877. His writings during exile reinforced his image as a defender of democracy and human rights, and he became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. During his time in exile, Hugo also worked on Les Miserables, which he saw as more than just a novel. It was a moral and political statement. When it was finally published in 1862, it resonated with readers across Europe and beyond, not only for its powerful storytelling, but also for its passionate plea for justice, compassion, and social reform. The novel's depiction of Jean Valjean, a man persecuted by an unforgiving legal system, reflected Hugo's belief that society should offer redemption rather than punishment. His exploration of poverty, injustice, and human resilience made Les Miserables a landmark work in world literature. Victor Hugo's political evolution was one of the most defining aspects of his life and career. He began as a royalist poet, but through his experiences and observations, he transformed into one of the most powerful voices for democracy, human rights, and social justice. His willingness to challenge authority, to speak for the voiceless, and to use literature as a tool for change ensured that his legacy would extend far beyond the realm of art. Hugo was not just a writer. He was a revolutionary thinker whose words and actions shaped the course of history. Victor Hugo's exile was not merely a period of physical displacement. It was a defining moment in his life that shaped his identity as a writer, thinker, and political activist. Forced to leave France in 1851 after openly opposing Napoleon III's coup d'état, Hugo found himself in a unique position, separated from his homeland, but still deeply engaged in its political and social struggles. His years in exile, first in Belgium, then on the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, became one of the most productive and influential phases of his career. It was during this time that he produced some of his most powerful works, using literature as both a weapon against tyranny and a voice for the oppressed. Hugo's decision to leave France was not taken lightly. He could have remained silent and accepted the rule of Napoleon III, as many intellectuals did. Instead, he chose exile as an act of defiance, refusing to compromise his principles. From the moment he set foot outside France, he became one of the most vocal critics of the Second Empire, using his writing to expose the corruption and authoritarianism of Napoleon III's regime. His exile, rather than diminishing his influence, amplified it. He became a symbol of resistance, admired by both political dissidents and ordinary citizens who longed for justice. His first major political attack on Napoleon III came in 1852 with Napoleon le Petit, a scathing critique of the emperor's rise to power. In this work, Hugo painted Napoleon III as a petty, incompetent, and cowardly ruler who had betrayed the ideals of the Republic. The book was banned in France, but it circulated clandestinely, further solidifying Hugo's reputation as a fearless opponent of tyranny. His words carried immense weight, not only among the French people, but also across Europe, where democratic movements were gaining momentum. In exile, Hugo also turned to poetry as a means of expressing his anger, grief, and hope for a better future. His collection Les Châtiments, 1853, was a direct attack on the Second Empire, filled with biting satire and fierce condemnation of Napoleon III's rule. Unlike his earlier poetry, which often focused on love, nature, and personal emotions, Les Châtiments was unapologetically political. Each poem served as a call to action, urging the French people to resist oppression and fight for their freedoms. Hugo had fully embraced his role as a poet of revolution, using his literary gifts to inspire change. However, exile was not just a time of political engagement. It was also a period of deep philosophical reflection. Isolated from the political turmoil of France, Hugo had the opportunity to explore broader themes of humanity, justice, and the meaning of existence. This intellectual journey culminated in Les Contemplations, 1856, a deeply personal and introspective collection of poetry. While still infused with social concerns, Les Contemplations also address themes of loss, spirituality, and the passage of time. The death of his beloved daughter Leopoldine in 1843 had left a profound mark on him, and many of the poems in this collection reflected his grief and search for meaning in the face of tragedy. Hugo's most ambitious work during his exile was Les Miserables, which he had started before leaving France but completed in Guernsey. Published in 1862, the novel was an immediate success, despite initial criticism from conservative critics who saw it as overly sentimental and politically charged. However, its impact was undeniable. The story of Jean Valjean, a man struggling against an unjust society, resonated with readers worldwide. The novel's themes, redemption, the brutality of the legal system, the plight of the poor, and the possibility of social change, made it a masterpiece of humanist literature. Hugo's exile had given him the distance to see France more clearly, and Les Miserables was his response to its failures and hopes. Despite being physically removed from France, Hugo remained actively engaged in its political affairs. He maintained correspondence with French Republicans, continued to denounce the empire's abuses, and refused multiple offers of amnesty from Napoleon III, stating that he would not return until liberty was restored. His unwavering stance only increased his prestige, turning him into a living legend among those who opposed the empire. His home in Guernsey became a sanctuary for exiled revolutionaries and intellectuals, reinforcing his role as a beacon of resistance. Hugo's exile also allowed him to explore themes of spirituality and the supernatural, which found expression in La Légende des siècles, 1859. This epic poetic work sought to capture the evolution of humanity through myth, history, and prophecy. It reflected his belief in progress, the idea that despite moments of darkness, humanity was moving toward greater enlightenment and justice. His vision of history was grand and optimistic, aligning with his lifelong faith in the power of human beings to overcome oppression. By the time Napoleon III's rule began to crumble in the late 1860s, Hugo's influence had only grown stronger. The collapse of the Second Empire in 1870 and the proclamation of the Third Republic finally allowed him to return to France, where he was welcomed as a hero. His exile had proven that the written word could be as powerful as any political action. Through his essays, poems, and novels, he had kept the spirit of resistance alive, shaping public opinion and inspiring future generations of activists and writers. Victor Hugo's years in exile were not a period of isolation, but one of immense creative and political impact. He transformed from a literary figure into a moral authority, proving that literature could be a force for social and political change. His exile reaffirmed his commitment to justice and strengthened his belief in the power of ideas. When he finally returned to France, it was not as a defeated exile, but as a triumphant symbol of resilience and unwavering conviction. Victor Hugo's return to France in 1870 was not merely a homecoming. It was the triumphant arrival of a man who had become a living symbol of resistance, justice, and unwavering commitment to democratic ideals. After nearly 2 decades in exile, Hugo stepped onto French soil once again, welcomed by crowds who saw in him the embodiment of moral integrity and patriotic devotion. His return coincided with one of the most turbulent periods in French history, marked by war, revolution, and the struggle to establish a stable republic. Even in his later years, Hugo remained an active participant in the political life of his nation, using his voice and writings to shape the future of France. The fall of Napoleon III in 1870, following France's defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, opened the door for Hugo's return. The collapse of the Second Empire and the establishment of the Third Republic seemed to confirm what Hugo had long prophesied: the triumph of democracy over tyranny. Despite his age, he re-entered the political arena with renewed energy, determined to play a role in shaping the new republic. His return was marked by a mixture of personal vindication and national crisis, as France struggled to recover from military defeat and internal division. One of the most dramatic episodes Hugo witnessed upon his return was the Paris Commune of 1871. This radical socialist uprising born out of frustration with the government's handling of the war, resulted in a brief but intense period of revolutionary rule in the capital. Though Hugo sympathized with the ideals of the Commune, particularly its calls for social justice, workers' rights, and democratic governance, he was also horrified by the violent repression that followed. The brutal suppression of the Commune by government forces, which led to the deaths of thousands of Parisians, deeply affected him. He openly condemned the massacre, emphasizing the need for reconciliation and justice rather than further bloodshed. Hugo's advocacy for amnesty for the communards, those who had participated in the uprising, became one of the key political causes of his later years. At a time when much of the French elite demanded harsh punishments for the rebels, Hugo called for forgiveness and national unity. His stance was controversial, and it cost him political support among conservatives, but he remained firm in his belief that democracy could not be built on vengeance. His efforts ultimately contributed to the gradual reintegration of former communards into French society, reinforcing his role as a voice of compassion and reason in a time of division. Despite his advanced age, Hugo continued to serve in public office. He was elected to the National Assembly in 1871 and later to the Senate in 1876. In these roles, he advocated for progressive policies, including universal suffrage, free education, and social reforms aimed at reducing poverty. He also continued his long-standing opposition to the death penalty, arguing that a truly civilized society should reject capital punishment. His speeches in the Senate, though less frequent than in his younger years, carried immense moral authority and reflected his unwavering commitment to human rights. Hugo's political engagement was not limited to France alone. His fame had spread across Europe and beyond, and he used his international influence to support democratic movements in other countries. He spoke out against oppression in Spain, Italy, and Russia, lending his voice to those who struggled against authoritarian regimes. His vision of a united Europe, built on the principles of justice and fraternity, was ahead of its time and foreshadowed later efforts toward European integration. In many ways, Hugo was not just a French statesman, but a global advocate for human dignity. While his political career continued, Hugo remained an active writer. In his later years, he produced works that reflected both his philosophical maturity and his deep concern for the future of humanity. Quatre Vingt-Trois, 1874, his last major novel, was a historical narrative set during the French Revolution. Unlike Les Miserables, which focused on social injustice, Quatre Vingt-Trois explored the moral complexities of revolutionary violence and the challenges of building a just society. The novel demonstrated Hugo's continued ability to grapple with profound political and ethical questions, even in his old age. As Hugo's influence grew, he became an almost mythical figure in French culture. His home in Paris became a pilgrimage site for admirers, intellectuals, and politicians. People sought his counsel, hoping to hear words of wisdom from the man who had witnessed and shaped so much of France's history. He was more than a writer or a politician. He was a national conscience, a moral guide who reminded the country of its highest ideals. His birthdays were celebrated as public events, and his words were quoted in speeches, newspapers, and protests. By the late 1870s and early 1880s, Hugo's health began to decline, but his spirit remained unbroken. He continued to write, reflect, and engage with the world around him. He had lived through the rise and fall of empires, the revolutions that had reshaped France, and the struggles of the working class. He had seen both the best and the worst of humanity, yet he never lost his belief in progress, justice, and the power of literature to inspire change. His final years were marked by a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that he had dedicated his life to the causes he believed in. Victor Hugo's return to France was not merely the closing chapter of a remarkable life. It was the culmination of everything he had fought for. His legacy as a political thinker, humanitarian, and champion of democracy was firmly established. Even as his body weakened, his words remained powerful, shaping the future of France long after he was gone. His political career, like his literary career, was a testament to his unyielding belief that justice and human dignity were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As Victor Hugo entered the final years of his life, he was no longer just a writer or a political figure. He had become a national symbol, revered across France and admired worldwide. His decades-long dedication to literature, justice, and human rights had cemented his place as one of the most influential voices of the 19th century. Though age and declining health limited his public activities, his influence only grew stronger. The people of France saw in him not only a literary giant, but a moral compass, a man who had stood unwavering in his principles despite the turbulent changes of his time. By the early 1880s, Hugo had become the embodiment of the Republican ideals that France was striving to uphold. His advocacy for democracy, social justice, and human dignity remained relevant as the Third Republic sought to stabilize itself in the aftermath of previous upheavals. Though he no longer actively participated in political debates, his presence alone carried immense symbolic weight. Every public appearance he made was met with crowds of admirers, eager to pay homage to the man who had shaped their understanding of justice and liberty. Hugo continued to write, though at a slower pace than in his earlier years. His later works, including L'Art d'être grand-père, 1877, reflected a more personal and introspective side of the author. As a grandfather, he found solace and joy in his family, and his poetry celebrated the innocence of childhood and the wisdom that comes with age. While his earlier writings had been filled with political fervor and revolutionary zeal, his final works expressed a quieter, more reflective philosophy, one that embraced love, compassion, and the passage of time. Despite his age, Hugo remained engaged in the social issues of his time. He continued to advocate for the abolition of the death penalty, a cause he had championed for decades. Even in his final years, he wrote letters and public statements urging France and the world to reject capital punishment, arguing that a truly just society must rise above vengeance and embrace rehabilitation. His unwavering stance on this issue demonstrated his lifelong commitment to human rights and his belief in the moral progress of civilization. As Hugo's health deteriorated, France prepared for the inevitable loss of one of its greatest figures. In 1881, the nation honored him with a grand celebration for his 79th birthday. The event was unprecedented in scale, with thousands of admirers filling the streets of Paris to pay tribute to him. Parades, speeches, and festivities were organized in his honor, reflecting the immense respect and admiration he commanded. The celebration was not just a recognition of his literary achievements, but an acknowledgement of his role in shaping the conscience of the French Republic. On May 22, 1885, Victor Hugo passed away at the age of 83. His death was met with an outpouring of grief from across France and beyond. The government declared a national day of mourning, and millions of people paid their respects to the man who had given voice to the oppressed and had fought tirelessly for justice. His body lay in state under the Arc de Triomphe, a rare honor reserved for national heroes. The funeral procession, attended by hundreds of thousands, was one of the largest in French history, reflecting the profound impact he had on the nation's collective consciousness. Hugo was buried in the Pantheon, the final resting place of France's greatest minds. His interment in this national monument was a testament to his enduring legacy, ensuring that future generations would remember him not only as a literary genius, but as a defender of human dignity and freedom. His final words, "Je vois la lumière, I see the light," encapsulated the optimism and faith in humanity that had guided his life and work. Even in death, he remained a beacon of hope, inspiring those who sought to build a more just and compassionate world. The legacy of Victor Hugo extends far beyond his lifetime. His works continue to be read and studied worldwide, with Les Miserables and Notre Dame de Paris remaining among the most celebrated novels in history. His ideas on justice, democracy, and social reform continue to resonate, influencing political thought and human rights movements across the globe. His words, written in the 19th century, still find relevance in the struggles of the modern world, reminding us of the power of literature to inspire change. Beyond literature, Hugo's impact can be seen in the cultural and political landscape of France. His advocacy for the poor and marginalized helped shape the progressive policies of the French Republic. His insistence on the importance of education, freedom of speech, and the protection of human rights set a precedent for future generations. Streets, schools, and public buildings across France bear his name, serving as a reminder of his contributions to the nation's moral and intellectual heritage. Victor Hugo's final years were a testament to the enduring power of his vision. Even as his physical strength waned, his ideas continued to shape the world around him. He had lived through revolutions, exile, and political upheavals, yet he never wavered in his belief in humanity's potential for progress. His life was a journey of artistic brilliance, political courage, and moral leadership, one that continues to inspire people across the world. His words, his actions, and his unwavering commitment to justice ensure that his legacy will never fade. Victor Hugo's death in 1885 marked the end of an era, but his legacy lived on through his works, which continued to shape literature, political thought, and artistic expression across the world. His influence transcended national borders, making him a truly global figure whose writings spoke to the universal struggles of justice, redemption, and human dignity. In the years and decades following his passing, Hugo's literary and philosophical contributions gained even greater recognition, cementing his status as one of the most important writers of all time. One of the key aspects of Hugo's enduring influence is the timeless relevance of his literature. Les Miserables, his magnum opus, remains one of the most widely read novels in history, translated into numerous languages and adapted into various forms, including theater, film, and television. The story of Jean Valjean's redemption, Inspector Javert's relentless pursuit of justice, and the struggles of the poor in 19th century France continues to resonate with readers worldwide. Its themes, social inequality, moral dilemmas, and the power of compassion, are as pertinent today as they were when Hugo first wrote them. Similarly, Notre Dame de Paris, better known to English readers as The Hunchback of Notre Dame, has left an indelible mark on literature and popular culture. The novel's vivid descriptions of medieval Paris, its exploration of human cruelty and beauty, and its plea for the preservation of historical monuments contributed to the revival of interest in Gothic architecture. In fact, Hugo's passionate call to protect France's architectural heritage led to the eventual restoration of Notre Dame Cathedral, proving that literature could have tangible effects on the real world. Hugo's poetic works also maintained their influence long after his death. His ability to capture the human experience through verse ensured that collections such as Les Contemplations and La Légende des Siècles remained essential reading for generations of poets and literary scholars. His poetry was not only a reflection of his personal joys and sorrows, but also a meditation on history, philosophy, and the future of humankind. Many of his verses became rallying cries for social movements, reinforcing his role as a poet of the people. Beyond literature, Hugo's political ideas continued to inspire reformers, activists, and intellectuals. His passionate defense of human rights, opposition to the death penalty, and advocacy for the poor became guiding principles for social justice movements in the 20th and 21st centuries. His vision of a unified, peaceful Europe, outlined in his speeches and essays, foreshadowed modern efforts toward European integration. Today, many consider him one of the intellectual forefathers of the European Union, as his dream of fraternity among nations resonates with the ideals of international cooperation and human solidarity. The reach of Hugo's influence extended beyond France and Europe. In Latin America, his works became essential reading for intellectuals and revolutionaries who saw in him a champion of the oppressed. Leaders such as Simón Bolívar and José Martí admired his commitment to justice, and his writings influenced the region's struggles for independence and social reform. In Asia, particularly in China and Japan, his novels were translated and widely read, inspiring literary and political movements that sought to address social inequalities. Hugo's presence in popular culture also remained strong, particularly through adaptations of his works. The musical adaptation of Les Miserables, first performed in 1980, became a global phenomenon, reaching audiences across the world and introducing new generations to his powerful narrative. Countless film versions of The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Les Miserables have kept his characters alive in the public imagination, proving the adaptability and universal appeal of his stories. These adaptations, though sometimes deviating from his original texts, have ensured that Hugo's themes of love, sacrifice, and resistance remain relevant to contemporary audiences. Even in the realm of education, Hugo's works continue to be studied and analyzed in academic institutions worldwide. Literary scholars examine his innovative narrative techniques, his use of symbolism, and his profound engagement with political and philosophical questions. His novels and poetry are staples of French literature curricula, and his influence can be seen in the writings of later authors, from Charles Dickens to Gabriel Garcia Marquez. His ability to blend poetic grandeur with social critique made him a model for future generations of writers who sought to use literature as a means of social transformation. Hugo's vision of literature as a force for change remains a guiding principle for writers and artists committed to addressing injustice. His belief that the written word could challenge tyranny, uplift the downtrodden, and inspire revolutions continues to shape the work of contemporary authors, playwrights, and filmmakers. His legacy serves as a reminder that literature is not merely an artistic pursuit, but a powerful tool for shaping the world. In the years since his passing, Victor Hugo has not faded into history. His words remain alive, continuing to ignite passions, provoke thought, and challenge societies to strive for justice. His belief in progress, his relentless advocacy for the marginalized, and his unparalleled literary genius ensure that his influence will endure for centuries to come. His name is not just one of the past. It is one that continues to shape the present and inspire the future. Victor Hugo's impact on both literature and society extends far beyond his own era. Even in the 21st century, his works continue to speak to the human condition, offering insights into the struggles for justice, freedom, and dignity that remain central to contemporary global debates. His unique blend of profound social critique, political engagement, and literary brilliance has left an indelible mark on modern thought. Hugo's continued relevance serves as a reminder that the themes he explored in the 19th century are far from outdated. They remain crucial to the pursuit of social progress in an increasingly complex world. One of the most enduring aspects of Hugo's legacy is his commitment to social justice. His works, particularly Les Miserables, portray the systemic inequalities and brutalities faced by the poor and marginalized. Through characters like Jean Valjean, Fantine, and Gavroche, Hugo painted a vivid picture of the human toll of poverty, highlighting the stark divisions between the ruling classes and the oppressed. These themes of social disparity and the need for reform resonate strongly in the modern world, where issues such as economic inequality, racial injustice, and systemic oppression remain prevalent. Hugo's advocacy for the downtrodden encourages contemporary movements that seek to challenge these inequities, whether through political action, social justice initiatives, or grassroots activism. Hugo's opposition to the death penalty also continues to influence modern discourse. In his time, his call for the abolition of capital punishment was radical. But today, many countries have followed his lead in rejecting the death penalty as an unacceptable form of punishment. His unwavering stance on this issue, grounded in his belief in human dignity and the possibility of redemption, has contributed to the global abolitionist movement. His legacy can be seen in the ongoing campaigns for human rights, where activists and organizations around the world draw inspiration from Hugo's work and his moral clarity on matters of justice. Moreover, Hugo's visionary commitment to democracy, human rights, and political reform continues to inspire individuals and movements dedicated to the protection of civil liberties and the promotion of democratic governance. His political activism, especially in his later years, established him as a figure who tirelessly fought against tyranny and in favor of the ideals of freedom, equality, and fraternity. In an era where democratic institutions are under threat in various parts of the world, Hugo's example reminds us of the necessity of defending democracy and advocating for the rights of all people, regardless of their social standing or nationality. The universality of Hugo's themes, love, sacrifice, redemption, and the struggle for a better world, ensures that his work transcends national and cultural boundaries. His works have been translated into hundreds of languages and continue to be read, performed, and adapted around the world. In countries grappling with political instability, social unrest, or economic hardship, Les Miserables often finds new relevance as a symbol of resistance against oppressive systems and a call for solidarity among the marginalized. Hugo's exploration of how individuals navigate the complexities of moral choice in a world rife with injustice speaks to universal struggles, making his work a powerful tool for inspiring change. The adaptability of Hugo's works to various media also contributes to their enduring influence. The numerous adaptations of Les Miserables in film, theater, and musical formats demonstrate how Hugo's narrative has been reinterpreted for contemporary audiences. The 1980 musical version, for example, has become one of the most performed and beloved productions in the world, with its themes of revolution and human compassion resonating strongly in modern times. Film adaptations, ranging from classic versions to contemporary retellings, bring new layers of meaning to Hugo's characters and stories. This ability to adapt to different forms of storytelling ensures that Hugo's ideas continue to evolve and reach new generations. Hugo's influence is not confined to the literary and political realms alone. He also left a lasting impact on the arts, particularly in the areas of visual culture and theater. His depiction of human suffering, the grandeur of historical events, and the beauty of nature inspired generations of artists, many of whom sought to capture the raw emotion and vivid imagery present in his writing. In the visual arts, Hugo's vision of a society in turmoil and the dramatic contrast between light and shadow can be seen in the works of many Romantic painters, who drew upon his powerful imagery. His influence on theater, especially through adaptations of his novels, continued well into the 20th century, where directors and playwrights took inspiration from his complex characters and their moral struggles. Furthermore, Hugo's role in the preservation of French cultural heritage remains an integral part of his legacy. His advocacy for the restoration of historical monuments, particularly Notre Dame Cathedral, was a precursor to the wider movement in France to safeguard its architectural treasures. Hugo's passionate defense of France's cultural identity and historical legacy was not merely an act of nostalgia, but a recognition that the past could offer valuable lessons for shaping the future. In the modern world, where cultural heritage is constantly under threat from both natural and human-made disasters, Hugo's belief in the importance of preserving historical monuments for future generations continues to resonate. In the realm of education, Hugo's works remain foundational texts for students of literature, philosophy, and history. His exploration of the human condition, his examination of moral dilemmas, and his complex character development provide rich material for intellectual analysis. His works also serve as gateways to understanding the historical and social context of 19th century France, particularly during periods of political turmoil and transformation. The global reach of his writing ensures that students from diverse backgrounds are exposed to his ideas, and that his influence continues to shape how future generations approach literature and social thought. Victor Hugo's legacy is thus a multifaceted one, spanning literature, politics, social justice, and the arts. His ability to address the timeless concerns of humanity, while speaking to the specific issues of his time, ensures that his work will continue to have relevance in the centuries to come. In an age of increasing global interconnectedness, his universal themes, freedom, equality, and fraternity, serve as a powerful reminder of the ideals that transcend national borders. The enduring power of his words, ideas, and moral vision ensures that Victor Hugo's legacy will remain an essential part of the conversation about human rights, justice, and the future of our world. Victor Hugo, the poet, novelist, and social activist, may have passed from the physical world, but his spirit endures in the ongoing struggles for a more just and compassionate society. His call to action, to confront the injustices of the world, to fight for the oppressed, and to seek redemption for all, remains as relevant as ever. His legacy is not only written in his books, but in the hearts and minds of those who continue to fight for a better world, inspired by his vision of what humanity could become.